The Mahratta Shipwreck by David Chamberlain. The captain of the Mahratta was woken in the early hours by a knocking on his wardroom door. After only having had a few hours of sleep, his mood was irritable from being disturbed. Previously, he had spent an exhausting 36 hours on the bridge as they steamed through the busy English Channel. He knew that at daybreak they would be at the mouth of the Thames estuary, where they would proceed to their final destination, Tilbury Docks. When he glanced at the clock on his cabin bulkhead, it read 3:13 a.m. However, when he saw the look on his second officer's face, he knew there was a major emergency. Captain William Ellery had been part of the Mahratta since she was commissioned for the Brockleback line in 1892. He had sailed on her from the beginnings as fourth officer until he had obtained the rank of master. Now, on the 9th of April 1909, his worst nightmare was to happen, and he was about to lose his beloved ship. Before grabbing a few hours of sleep, he had left the helm of his ship in the good hands of a Trinity House pilot and the second officer, Albert Day. Now he was informed that the Mahratta had gone aground on the Goodwin Sands. As he made his way to the vessel's bridge, he saw and heard flashes of cannons fired from the Gull lightship. This was to warn the Coast Guard ashore that there was a casualty on the sands. As Captain Ellery entered the bridge, subdued wheelhouse lighting showed his look of fatigue. The pilot, Mr. Finnis, was in a heated conversation with the second officer about their predicament. Day accused the pilot of using the North Star for navigation and not the compass, also over the confusion of buoyed lights flashing nearby. Ellery ordered his second officer to summon the chief engineer onto the bridge to discuss the situation of how they could rectify the mishap and get off the sandbank. The look of annoyance was on Ellery's face when Albert Day walked back onto the bridge, alone, after 30 minutes, and in a state of shock. He informed the captain that after trying to awaken the 35-year-old Samuel Gibson, he had forced the cabin door, only to find that the chief officer was behind it and in a pool of blood, dead, with his throat cut. Along with Daylight, 3 lifeboats from Deal, Ramsgate and Broadstairs were alongside the Mahratta, accompanied with 2 tugs from Dover. The skippers of these vessels were quick in giving Ellery advice on how to save the 5,630-ton ship from the clutches of the Goodwin Sands. As a company man, he decided to use the ship's engines to solve the problem without additional cost. Over the high tide, the Mahratta's propellers churned up the seabed, sending sandy spray from her stern. After a while, Captain Ellery relented and employed the help of the tugs. However, she did not budge an inch. Over the following day's high water, 6 more tugs joined in the efforts of towing the inert ship from the clutches of the sandbank, without avail. It was decided that the 446-foot ship had to be lightened some of her bulky cargo for another attempt. Bales of cotton and jute were abandoned overboard, and a barge came to take off some of the more valuable cargo. As this was happening, a local beach boat went alongside the Mahratta's hull, and a police officer went on board. After Inspector Hayward interrogated Ellery, it appeared that the chief engineer had received a letter from his wife when the ship had received mail off Portland. The letter could not be found, although a junior engineer stated that Gibson had seemed depressed after receiving it. By this time, the ship was starting to take on a list, and groaning noises were coming from the hull. Without warning, a split appeared along her deck, and rivets on the hull were shearing off and likened to the sounds of gunshots. The noise terrified the crew, who were assisting in unloading, and all 87 jumped into the barge that was moored alongside. They refused to reboard the Mahratta and carry on with their duties. This was the last straw for Captain Ellery, and as he looked at the terrified crewmen's faces, he relented and let them be transported back to Dover. He also abandoned his doomed ship to the salvage company and made his way ashore in one of the deal boats that were assisting in recovery of the cargo. The gales over Easter made any other attempts to refloat the Mahratta impossible, and she quickly became a total wreck. The last living thing to be taken off her was a black cat that had somehow been abandoned and was found on the ship's bridge, which was barely above the waterline. The Board of Trade inquiry found the pilot and second officer were to blame through negligence and had their licence and ticket rescinded for 3 months. At the inquest of Chief Engineer Gibson, it was declared that he had committed suicide, although no reason was submitted why. At that time, the Mahratta was to be the largest ship ever to have been lost on the Goodwin Sands.